Okay, so I'd like to now introduce our two speakers from the OECD, Christine Langenbucher and Anne Loringson. Their presentation will take us through findings of the OECD's forthcoming policy brief on active labour market policy measures to mitigate the rise in long-term unemployment. This draws on responses to a joint OECD and European Commission questionnaire, which was answered by more than 40 countries. And the speakers will focus in particular on mitigating the negative consequences of the current crisis on vulnerable job seekers. Anne and Christine, over to you.
Okay, good morning from Paris to everyone. My name is Christine Langenbucher and I'm kicking off this presentation today and will later hand over to my colleague Anne Loringson, who many of you know. First of all, many thanks, Thekla, for your kind introduction and also to the organizers of this webinar for today's invitation. We titled our presentation, No One Left Behind, because this is what we think is particularly important in the current situation. And now from our side, a few opening remarks to set the scene for today's discussion. Okay, there's always a bit of time until we move to the next slide. So let me first give you a brief overview on the research and analysis that today's presentation builds up on. Thekla has already actually mentioned it, and I would like to start with a very, very big thank you to you, because in September and October, the OECD sent out this questionnaire on active labour market policies to mitigate the rise in unemployment and long-term unemployment to EU and OECD countries. And by now, as Thekla said, we've received, well, in fact, responses by all countries. And this is amazing in the short amount of time. And we know that many of you who listen in today have been involved in the responses. So a big thank you to you for taking the time to respond to this questionnaire. And obviously, on top of all your other responsibilities that you have, especially in the current situation. As mentioned, we'll plan to soon publish a policy brief with the more or less full results from this questionnaire, but the headline results we already would like to give to you today. So what do we observe? Vulnerable groups, they're most affected by this crisis. There's many workers in the EU and the OECD countries that actually have received generous support through job retention schemes, but not all workers are covered and not everyone has been in this fortunate situation. So today's seminar is about the most vulnerable, and here we identify a couple of them. Again, as in many crises in the past, youth are affected because they often are the first to move out of the labor market again if they're already in. But we're also very concerned about those who actually find it difficult to make the transition into the labor market. Non-standard workers who often don't have any of this protection through job retention schemes, low-wage earners who also are often not protected or are in sectors that are most impacted by the crisis. And it also seems that women are on average more affected, even so this is often a very complex picture. So what to do in order to ensure that there's not yet again a scarred generation, again rising long-term unemployment as we observed following the global financial crisis? We think this certainly requires substantial additional investments into active labor market programs. And this is what we asked you in our questionnaire on the changes to plans for the budgets for active programs, both still in this year, 2020 and 2021. So what you can now see in those charts in green is that actually half of all EU and OECD countries had increased their budgets on PES and administration, and over 40% expect further increases also next year. If we look at active measures, there's also been a massive increase this year, 40%. No, even more, almost 80%. So increases this year, and yet another 40% expect further increases next year. But as you can see for the charts for 2021, there's obviously also a lot of things that are still under discussion or the outcomes are not yet known. And this is the upper blue bit and the gray area. So these are countries that at the time of sending the questionnaire back to us, were not able to give an answer on this. The big question is this enough? I mean, as you can see, this is mainly a yes/no question, like, what did you do and did you increase or not? But obviously, how much countries increased and whether this is enough to match the rise in unemployment, this is something which we'll only see later on. And the thing, what we learned from the global financial crisis is that back then it was not enough. The increase in spending did not match the rise in unemployment. So we hope this time will be different, and learn how to spend is what my colleague Anne is now going to tell you about. Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And good morning, everybody. So how to limit the negative impact of COVID-19 on the labor market outcomes and promote a faster recovery using active labor market policies. So public and private employment services have played a key role in many OECD countries already since the start of the COVID-19 crisis. Sudden changes in the working environment and need for scaling up digital channels rapidly have caused major changes in PES operating and business models. Since the onset of the crisis, PES across the OECD scaled up and introduced new remote service offers to job seekers and employers. And investments need to continue in the digitalization of services, considering that this can enable the continuation of PES support even when face-to-face meetings are limited. And in addition, digital tools can support PES efficiency and effectiveness, especially considering that they have to serve higher numbers of clients. So, for example, these tools can help in automating job mediation and benefit processing, as well as targeting support to those who need it the most, so vulnerable groups. To support the reallocation of labor across occupation sectors and regions, active labor market policies are needed to facilitate first matching between employers and job seekers, and secondly, these need to support upskilling and reskilling to meet the new emerging needs on the labor market. And in addition to the changed working environments, investing in digital skills has become more important than ever before. And also to add that empirical evidence from the previous years and previous crises suggests that training programs are particularly effective during recessions, partly also because the negative effect due to lock-in effect is lower. And lastly, while many countries have introduced or expanded short-time working schemes to preserve jobs, and especially in the sectors that have been most affected by the crisis. But as economies are opening up, it is necessary to move from preserving jobs more to supporting hiring workers again. But of course, these employment incentives and programs need to be very well designed and well targeting the groups that are furthest from the labor market, so that these measures can be actually effective and efficient, so to reduce unemployment and support actually the vulnerable population groups. Next slide. So let's look more specifically at the most vulnerable groups. So people who might have been in weak attachment to the labor market already before COVID-19 crisis, having potentially more major or multiple labor market integration obstacles, such as low skills, care obligations, health limitations, and so on. So first of all, it is important for the public employment services to make more efforts to reach out to these groups, because usually these groups tend to be underrepresented in PES clientele. So this should be done possibly in cooperation with other stakeholders, of course. So, and PES need to also identify the vulnerable groups early on among their clients using profiling tools to better target PES support and active labor market policies. Vulnerable groups furthest away from the labor market require then a step-by-step approach, starting from strengthening life skills and the social integration. This step should be followed by up and reskilling to meet the labor market needs, and whether simultaneously are followed up by job search assistance. And for particularly vulnerable groups, one step on this pathway can be also working in sheltered workplace before being able to be integrated to primary labor market, which should be in general the final outcome to most groups. In addition, the effects of these policies are stronger if they are followed up by post-placement support. When people face multiple obstacles, the provision of employment services alone might not be sufficient, though. So the institutions providing employment services need to cooperate, coordinate, network with providers of other policies, so social policies, health policies, education services, and nevertheless, capacity and adequate funding of all these service providers is key to achieve successful support to people in need. And just to summarize, so the evidence on the effectiveness of active labor market policies for vulnerable groups. So the effective programs are individualized, step-by-step approaches, and reflects the complexity of problems that vulnerable groups face. And as these policies tend to be relatively costly, it is really important to target the support well. Next slide. So as the last slide showed, the vulnerable groups need generally more activities to reach out to them, to network with other institutions to support these groups, more counseling and motivation support, as well as follow-up support. So the support to vulnerable groups requires more effort from employment counselors than other groups. In addition, while many processes in public employment services can be automated and digitalized to increase efficiency, counseling vulnerable groups is one field that remains to require more interaction also by physical public employment service counselors, partly also because these groups tend to have lower digital skills and maybe less access to internet as well as devices to connect to the e-service channels. So according to the OECD European Commission joint questionnaire in the past month, almost half of the public employment services increased staff numbers in 2020 in response to COVID-19. About 70% in total, so the two last columns overlap, increased staff and or reallocated staff. so made some changes. And to combine the changes from 2020 and 2021, basically 3/4 of public employment services have made some changes in staff numbers this year, or have specific plans for the next year. Well, in addition, of course, many countries had not made specific decisions yet regarding the staff numbers during the time they were answering the questionnaire, but it's anticipated that more public employment services will have higher staff numbers as well. So only a few countries are not increasing the staff levels, or maybe, well, a few countries even actually cut the staff numbers. While the majority of changes in staff levels are still responses to the generally increased inflow of job seekers and assuring benefit provision, some countries already actually also highlight that they plan to increase staff numbers to support better the vulnerable groups. Next slide. So about training. So training programs are needed in response to COVID-19 outbreak to support particularly the structural changes in the economy in general. And the vulnerable groups are in particular need of training programs, as these groups have been particularly hit in the current crisis. But in addition, also other measures provided to this group, or this holistic support, needs to be often combined with training, even if the economic situation would be actually better. And in addition, the current crisis has highlighted more crucially than ever before the need for digital skills. And these are, again, the skills that are often lacking among the vulnerable groups. And almost all countries that replied to the questionnaire, so basically 98%, have or are planning to make some changes in their classroom training programs, and 78% have or are making changes in the workplace training programs. And maybe more importantly, and specifically, almost 3/4 of countries are increasing the places available in classroom training, and 1/4 in workplace training programs. And there are already also quite a few examples of countries that also address the training needs of the vulnerable groups more specifically, such as supporting these groups with internet access and devices to participate in training, increasing the programs aiming at digital skills, and increasing outreach to low-skilled population more specifically. So, but nevertheless, it's a question whether further efforts are likely needed. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you, Anne. So I'll try to quickly wrap up because we're already running out of time with the last slide on employment incentives, which should help also vulnerable groups to make the final transition into the open labor market. In response to our questionnaire, 60% of countries mentioned that they already made adjustments now in response to COVID in order to increase the number of target groups, for example, of their private sector employment incentives. And over 40% of countries mentioned reductions in non-wage labor costs. If you don't find your country mentioned here, please note these are countries who have changed because of COVID. So maybe you already have generous employment incentives that cover a lot of the vulnerable groups, but those countries who recently made changes tried to target them, especially at the long-term unemployed, youth, women, and persons with disabilities. But there's also been facilitated application procedures, and on reducing social security contributions also. More sectors, small and medium enterprises, or especially those sectors affected by the group, by the crisis. So this, I think, brings us to the end of our little presentation. And let me wrap up with the theme of the OECD's economic outlook that was released yesterday, and it was turning hope into reality. And I think this is what I personally hope for, that also in the area of employment support, we can give support to the most vulnerable in society. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Christine and Anne. Really interesting to see the results of that research. Before we go to questions, and can I please remind all attendees to put your questions in the Q&A function and not in the chat. Before we go to questions, let's just look at the results of the poll that we did before the presentation. So the question was, what is your PES currently doing to support the most vulnerable groups? And it looks like the majority of you are offering personalized job search support, but there's also a lot of activity around training to increase employability and wage subsidies and reskilling or upskilling to maintain employment. Great. Thank you. Thank you for participating in the poll. I'm now going to hand over to Eamon Davern, who's our subject matter expert, and he's going to take questions for Christine and Anne for about 15 minutes. Eamon.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Thekla. You won't be surprised to hear there are already many questions following that very interesting presentation. I think our colleague Michael Mosikata from the ILO, I think I'd like to pose his question first. I think is perhaps one of the most significant things we need to address. He's asking, given the unfortunate second wave of COVID and the continuing restrictions on labour market activity, have Christina or Anna got a view as to how soon they think countries can sensibly transit from job retention to hiring? Because the timing is obviously crucial. So how soon should countries change direction to have the best effect?
Well, I think this is a particularly difficult question, and I guess the situation is very different in many countries. I mean, as we all see in our daily news, we see in some countries, all of a sudden the virus seems or the infection rates seem to go down, and then economies can open up again. Restaurants can open up again, and then in another country they just started to shut restaurants, as happened, for example, my home country, Germany. So I think it's very difficult to say. I mean, the general, I think, theme is that job retention schemes cannot continue until the point when every single one of us is vaccinated, if we choose to vaccinate. Once we have this choice, right? But so, yeah, I think that there is a phased approach and a different approach in many countries, but it is driven by the fact how much against a health background economies can reopen. But then also, I think this is an area that we're increasingly looking into. What can we do instead of just, sampling our thumbs in the meantime? And so what is possible to do with people who currently benefit, for example, from job retention schemes? Is there a case of engaging them more in our employment services, either offering services or even make them take up our services? So these are areas that I'm very interested in. And then obviously many of the people who maybe are still now in employment, they're at risk of losing their employment. So the question is, where can we kick in of making sure that people, once they've lost their job, we can help them as soon as the economy opens up back into the labor market. But this, I think, concerns a lot the people who maybe are not the most vulnerable in society. And I think it will be more difficult to reach out to those who are not in these fortunate situations. And I think this is where Anne mentioned about how important it is to identify them and then offer stepwise approaches. So first of all, integrating them into the systems, making them ready for receiving employment support. But again, I think that there is no necessarily standard way that all countries can follow, because it depends so much on the country situation.
Thank you very much, Christine. Clearly still very much an evolving agenda. A question from a colleague, Susanna Kratz. She'd like to unpack a little bit of the data concerning the increases in staff. A question is, do the staffing increases particularly relate to frontline counsellors giving the kind of integration support, or are the increases also including people hired for more administrative tasks, including delivery of benefits and other administrative functions? Do you know anything about the breakdown of the increased personnel in PES?
I think we're still in the process of reviewing all the details, and we've not necessarily in our questionnaire asked exactly, like we've not asked for PES to respond or for countries to respond where exactly they put their new staff. So this was a bit on a voluntary basis for countries to tell us. But from the responses, I think we can say it's a mixture. Certainly what happened up to now was a lot in the administrative function, especially so many public employment services are responsible for processing those job retention schemes. And obviously many shifted staff into this function, but many also hired extra staff either for this or for telephony support in contact centers.
Thank you very
Maybe
much.
just to add that the increases for 2021, a few countries that have already highlighted more specific plans often do include also staff to serve job seekers and especially also deliver some specific active labour market programs to some groups.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive answers there. We've heard a lot in previous discussions about concerns about whether public employment service clients have got sufficient digital competence to be able to engage remotely with support services. We've got a question here about, have you got any observations about the particular training needs for PES staff to ensure they can offer adequate support to clients through digital methods, particularly during lockdown periods? So how do we need, what sort of skills do PES staff need to be able to engage with vulnerable people through an entirely new medium, essentially? Any views on the things we need to make sure PES staff can be aware of when they're working with people remotely who they used to deal with primarily face-to-face?
This is again, it's an area that we've not necessarily covered in our questionnaire, but we do work with many countries in this area, and what I think what we hear the most is first of all, well, realizing who can't use your digital school tools, right? And then I think what a lot of countries told us in the very first place is this importance of telephony support. I mean, this is a lot of countries were in the past actually characterized by getting people into their offices. So it was kind of either this like personal approach or online. And not all countries necessarily use telephony support to a very large degree. So I think this is where a lot of countries now over the past few months have increased telephony support. And I still think that a lot of things that you can do in a personal meeting, at least can to some degree be replaced by telephony support. And I think it's also, I'm stressing telephony because obviously the ideal scenario would be that people use even video calls, which at least gives you this face-to-face interaction with clients. But I think this is not necessarily a reality in many countries. Even so, many customers, even those with low digital skills, nowadays have smartphones and possibly do these video calls on a private basis. It's not necessary that all countries have the technical means to just offer video calls via a secure platform, or at least a platform that's been agreed. So I think telephony is the important thing, and then I guess it's also important as soon as you can reopen the offices to make sure that those limited number of places where you can see people in person, they're reserved to the most vulnerable, to those people where you are most concerned about. And in addition, obviously, there could be something like even outreach services where counselors go to people, but this is happening in very few countries, I think.
Thank you. I think that's a very perceptive response there. Again, lots of PES moved, I think, directly from face-to-face to digital, missing out the telephony kind of channel actually in recent years. So maybe there's a particularly good lesson for us there. We've got a question from...
Eamon, I think Anne wanted to contribute as well.
Sorry, thank you, Anne.
Just one sentence answer. So indeed, the training of counselors is extremely important when the tools are changed, and the move to digital channels now very fast paced and high volume, of course, has put another pressure on public employment services on how to cope with training to their own staff. But it's has been quite nice to see that the PES have been very inventive in delivering that. So also through digital channels, training their staff to use the new tools, as well as it gives some more opportunities to even record the training programs, have them available that maybe wasn't the first choice before, but actually has some additional value that the employees can actually rewatch and learn.
Thank you very much, Anne. We've got a question from Hilde Olsen from the PES Secretariat. She was interested in the figures that indicate that some countries are looking at reducing their active labour market programme expenditure during 2021. Do you have any particular explanations as to why that might be the case in certain places?
I mean, first of all, in most countries, this is indications. It's not necessarily the final decisions. I think there's two things that maybe explain this type of response. The first being, in fact, that some countries massively increased this year. Obviously, they still hope the situation improves next year. So in comparison to this year, they would reduce next year again and go back to the longer term plan, so to say. And I think that there has been like one or two countries, none of them EU countries, I have to say, that had, I think, longer term plans for reducing the active budget against the drop in unemployment as well. And I think these budgets have not yet been confirmed to change, potentially increase, so that they're still on the decreasing trajectory. So this is something which could still change, but I think these are the two main explanations on why we saw the responses decrease in a few countries.
Thank you very much.
That there are also sometimes just political decisions. So it's not always related to the number of job seekers or PES responsibilities.
Thank you. Got another very, I think, topical question here. Do you have a view on how significant the role of benefit increases should be during the COVID pandemic in terms of the generosity or the period in which people can receive benefit support? Do you think there are any kind of risks for that kind of decision? And have any views as to when we should decide to increase benefits or when leave the system in place that was there before?
I think it's a question a bit that maybe goes beyond our area of expertise. I mean, there's certainly this case about extending benefits currently to groups that are not currently covered, and I think this is very, very important, because usually in most countries, giving support comes hand in hand with also activation support. So this is a way of well, first of all, ensuring people's livelihoods, but then also engaging them with the services that are available. In terms of increases to existing schemes and the pure monetary amount, I think this is really it's a difficult question, and usually goes at least often beyond the European situation. I mean, this is something that happened, as you know, a lot in the United States, where unemployment benefits have increased in their generosity through often one-off payments or payments over a couple of months. But then exactly there's usually no one covered through job retention scheme. So I think this is a complex picture which is not easy to answer as such. So not say anything more on that, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm going to pause the Q&A there. It is time for us to move on. So thanks very much to Anne and Christine for your answers. There are some questions that haven't been answered yet in the Q&A, and if you like, you could add written answers to those questions while we move on to the next presentation. So we're now going to hear from Tuija Oivo, who is from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland. And Tuija's presentation will focus on paths to employment for partially disabled people that have been these paths that have been implemented by the Finnish PES. And the presentation will also cover the inclusive approach that PES Finland has taken around provision of benefits, dedicated services and tailored support measures. Tuija, over to you.
Thank you, Tekla. Dear colleagues and participants, it's nice to be with you this morning. And in my presentation, I would like to tell you about our employability program, which we are just now carrying out in Finland. This program is actually based on the findings of the report Pathways to Employment for People with Partial Workability, which was published 2 years ago. And I'm very happy that I was another rapporteur there with my colleague Raija Kerätär. And actually, we proposed to establish this nationwide work with ability program. And of course, I'm very happy that our new government has taken it account. So why we need this employability program? Of course, first, rising the employment rate is one of the key objects of the program. And it's essential to increase the labor market participation of people with partial work capacity. And it's even more important now because of COVID-19. And actually, we are already facing shortages of skilled workers in labor market. We also know that the health status of unemployed people is weaker than those who work. And the majority of persons with decreased workability goes unrecognized. That is something we are very worried about. The number of disability pensions is rising all the time, every year more than 20,000 people. And at the same time, there are about 65,000 partially disabled outside of labor market, and they say that they would like to get employed. So we can't afford to waste any of this human capital. Could I see the next slide, please? We need the holistic approach here. And this, our program has actually 3 key elements, and it's important that we take account them at the same time. So of course, we need reformation of workability services. And then at the same time, we need inclusion supporting solutions for the labor market. And third, we need at the same time encouraging benefit system. This holistic approach is needed. Then a few words about these key elements. Could I have a next one, please? Actually, somehow something new for us is that we are focusing on social economy and inclusive labor market here. First, we are actually preparing a strategy for social enterprises, because you know that social enterprises actually have special characteristics and needs, however, that are not recognized in the current strategies and policies in my country. So to develop their business and increase employment, social enterprises need suitable measures to promote their capabilities of the business model, awareness, resources, and competence. And this is very interesting work, and we hope that our strategy will be ready in April next year. Another thing here is a new program for boosting employment through procurement, launched at the beginning of August. And it aims to increase support for employment through the public procurement. Actually, the annual value of public procurements in Finland is approximately 35 billion euros, and it means that it's a really possibility if we can use it more. And actually, we think that based of this project, we think that could it later be more or less obligation to add these to use these public procurements for employment, but let's see. And the third thing, it's also quite interesting, I think. In this autumn, our government decided on action to build a Finnish model for employment in the intermediate labor market. The model to be developed will be based on the good experiences from Sweden Samhall company, and the results of Finnish job bank experiences. Actually, the purpose of the model is to increase employment opportunities where the person is in an employment relationship with an intermediate labor market. And we hope that this work will be completed in the end of January next year. So what will be the role of PES in here in our program? The next slide, please. The role of PES is important, of course, and close cooperation with other actors and partners. The cooperation with municipalities will be even closer from the beginning of next year, when the local government trials boosting employment will start, and services of the vulnerable groups will be transferred to municipalities in these trial areas. But I think that the main question, however, is how to increase the demand of labor in vulnerable groups. And that's why employment and recruiting services will be redesigned to establish an ecosystem that will combine the services and service platforms of private and public service providers. The aim is to build flexible service packages which are targeted to the needs of the employers. For instance, by combining work coaching, work adaptation, counseling, arrangement support, and pay subsidy. And we want also increase the role of third sector disability organizations and so on. And we think that this work is one of the main tasks of our new job ability coordinators. Of course, job craving, job crafting can be effective ways to create meaningful and productive employment. And our government also aims to increase the use of pay subsidy in enterprises. And we are reforming also the third sector's pay subsidy. The aim is there that strong individual support, review of work capacity and other services are linked in the pay subsidy. Of course, we need individual training programs, as mentioned before here, and they will be provided by also enabling vocational competence-based qualifications, apprenticeship training, on-the-job training, job learning, and the role of workplace counselors will be strengthened. It's necessary to identify existing skills, tailor-made offer of learning and mentoring, and of course people have to have the opportunity to have their knowledge and skills validated. And guidance and counseling is important. The thing is more integrated packages. And then the last picture very shortly. The next slide, please. As we well know, the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it's a very important convention, and we have taken it seriously. So we have published this spring a report which identifies structural and legislative barriers that place persons with disabilities in an unequal position in working life. And here you can see our nice, perfect Anni Kyryläinen, who was an author of the report. And the report pays special attention to services, information, and attitudes. For example, that PES services should be developed in collaboration with organizations and experts by experience. And it highlights also PES staff need more information about the rights of persons with disabilities and about their services. Dear colleagues, social sustainability means we take responsibility for each other and our common future. There is equality between people and everyone feels fair and just. We want to make sure that everyone is on board. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tuija. That was a really interesting and great presentation. Thank you. For attendees, if you have questions for Tuija's presentation, please add them to the Q&A, and we will take questions after our last presentation, which is coming up now. And that's from Lenka Kint from VDAB, the Belgian PES. Lenka's video seems to be playing up, but hopefully she'll be able to take us through her presentation on how Belgian PES has adapted its remote counselling services to focus especially on vulnerable job seekers, and it'll also look at the benefits and challenges of digital counselling for those vulnerable groups and how these will be addressed in the future. So Lenka, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lenka, like you know, and I'm the Strategic Account Manager, International Relations at VDAB. And VDAB is a Flemish PES of Belgium. Today, I will explain you what we did at VDAB to continue the support to vulnerable groups despite of the COVID pandemic. So first, a little bit of history. It's always nice to have a look at the past, we have already a very long history and a great experience in working remotely. Let's have a look at the evolution. Once upon a time, VDIB introduced the so-called channel mix. The principle is very simple. We always wanted to see our counselors, but due to the techniques that we have, it wasn't necessary anymore to see them all the time. We could phone them, we could mail them, we could email them, etc., etc. But this system never really found acceptance with the VDIB mediators. They maintained all of them as much as possible, face-to-face contacts with the job seekers. So in 2018, so that's already 2 years ago, VDIB launched what we call the new contact strategy. And the process consists of 3 steps. We have the digital first step. So the first step and the first reflex is to use digital devices to deliver services. VDIB, by doing this, has online services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The second step is human digital. If the customer needs more help, he can always have it by contacting a mediator by phone, mail, video chat, etc. But that's digital, but human. You see somebody, but not for real. It's like the situation now with COVID. Then finally, we have the face-to-face step. That is only when the 2 first steps don't work. So only when it's really necessary and with an added value that we have to be able to prove. In that case, the mediator meets face-to-face with the customer. For vulnerable groups, however, the mediators were a little bit afraid and they were using face-to-face contacts almost all the time. Regarding the staff, since 2019, VDIB is working independent of place and time. This means that already got his laptop so that we were able to work from home or from another place. And we also all got our mobile phones. So, and then we had COVID. And in general, we can say that Corona, the pandemic, was the catalyst that VDIB needed to fully roll out the contact strategy of digital first, face-to-face if needed. The working independently of place of time and time became working independently of time at home, because everybody was working at home. There were no face-to-face contacts anymore, neither with clients, with colleagues, with your boss. It wasn't possible anymore. And even if we practiced already remote work, still it was a big turnaround and adjustment. And this was especially the case for the services to vulnerable groups. Because face-to-face was completely impossible for a while, the first lockdown has also shown that there really are customers who cannot be reached with digital channels. And that part of the mediation work really does require face-to-face contact. So I propose to have a closer look to the adaptation of the services to vulnerable group. When we speak about vulnerable groups, we speak about 3 services. First of all, the general services for vulnerable groups. They are given inside VDIB by the colleagues at the intensive service provision, and they are given by a partner called specialized counseling, but they are working in our premises normally. So the client doesn't know whether they are having a person from VDIB or from a partner before them. And we are also working with other partners. But it took a while for the mediators to overcome the cold feet fear. But the service for vulnerable groups have also taken the step to digital contacts at the end. So we made the switch. There was a lot of services by phone, by video chat, mostly, like the colleague said, preference for phone calling. And for non-native speakers or deaf persons, we also looked for solutions to be able to call with 3. There was a possibility to have an interpreter. The second part of the services is the services specialized screening. They provide screening of learnability, distance to employment, psychological problems, and so on and so on. This service has also made the switch to digital communication challenge for a part of the screening, mainly for the interviews. But when an observation is needed, it's more difficult through digital contacts. And if this observation is the most important part of the screening to reach a conclusion, then it's better to organize face-to-face contacts, which we do now, but which we couldn't do during the first lockdown. Furthermore, some customers have no or little access to digital communication challenge. And to make the step to switch to digital communication with the services, a number of inspiration sessions were organized so that the colleagues could strengthen and support each other in this switch. Then we are going to the third service to vulnerable groups, and that's the team employment support measures. This team approves applications to enter the social economy. The team goes on site in the company to see what is needed in terms of adjustment of the working place, the premium given, etc. And after a while, they see whether customers working in the social economy can transfer to the normal economy. So they work not only with persons with physical issues, but also autism, social or psychological issues, etc. Therefore, face-to-face moments in the workplace have always remained important because they have to estimate the impact on the company of return and the need for guidance in the workplace. To see the physical work employment environment is an important element in this. So, conclusion. Let's first look at the positive aspects. It's important to find a healthy mix between face-to-face contacts and remote contacts. But the general feeling is that more has turned out to be possible than originally thought. Intensive mediation must start with the first interview within the 2 weeks. And Corona has ensured that we can process the influx faster by making more digital contacts. You can see the figures. Before Corona, in January, we reached 38% of our clients for the first interview within 2 weeks. In June, it was 78%. That was in the middle of the Corona pandemic. And now, since September, it's about 63%. So that's an improvement because of the digital contacts. The first calls now are more often by telephone, even when face-to-face is possible. The mediators and the clients prefer to phone each other. The starting interview is shorter. In the past, we had to count half an hour. Now it's about 15 minutes. And the mediators can give homework to the persons, to the clients, for the next interview. And the next interview very often is then face-to-face. And the fact that they have their homework makes a lot of difference in the service delivery. But there are also negative aspects, of course. There are groups that we don't reach or reach much less digitally. For example, people in poverty and newcomers, because there are too many barriers for them. There is no access to the internet, or they have no devices. They are not familiar with digital channels, or they are afraid of this. So now our specialized counselors send their clients to digital basic trainings, which they didn't do systematically before Corona because they thought it wouldn't help. But now we discovered that it helps. So we send them to digital basic training. Part of the specialized training and the estimate of loss of return and the guidance need cannot be done digitally because observation is important observation of the body language, the movement, the work environment, and so on and so on. And then this is something especially for VDAB. Quite a few of these clients use only mobile devices, and the VDAB systems are not sufficiently adapted to this. So we will have to do something about this. We have to make the shift to mobile devices for all our systems. And then there are some legal requirements that have to be fulfilled to be able to continue the expansion of the digital services. As in the current situation, we work face-to-face if there is no other option, but the face-to-face is not the majority. And as a general conclusion, we can say that some issues can be solved by VDAB. Other issues are bigger societal issues like poverty, etc. And this is not up to us. We can't save the world. We can only help job seekers. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lenka, for that presentation, and apologies for referring to VDAB as the Belgian PES. It is, of course, the Flemish PES. Apologies for that. If you have questions for Tuija or for Lenka, please add them to the Q&A. We're now going to take a maximum of 15 minutes of questions on these two presentations. Eamon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Thekla. Lots of questions on those very interesting presentations. First of all, Tuija, a question concerning your presentation on the reforms in Finland. I think a very important question. Do you have any information already available about the unit cost of this very comprehensive and integrated support service you're now offering? So do you know anything about the actual delivery cost per client of the services in Finland?
I was afraid that you will ask that question because I have to say that unfortunately not. But we, of course, we are working with this whole the time and trying to have some kind of cost benefit analysis. What is what we are doing now? How can we do it more effective and so on? But unfortunately, I cannot answer your question. Sorry.
No, I don't think you need to apologise. I think the unit cost of delivering labour market programmes is one of the most often asked and difficult to respond to questions. And I don't think many countries, if any, have got a really clear answer to that, but something that you're looking at, which is very encouraging.
Yes, and what is important here, I think, is also how much we use in passive unemployment benefits and so on. And for me, it will be important that if we could change this passive unemployment benefits as an active employment policies. So it's something interesting, and we have to take account all these measures, including social and health, actually, and the whole welfare economy is something which is necessary here.
Thank you. I think that's a very well considered observation. Thank you, Tuija. Lenka, a couple of colleagues were intrigued by the homework that you set people given your approach in VDAB. Could you elaborate a bit more about the kind of homework that people are set following their interventions with clients?
So, for example, they can already try to make their CV, or during the first interview, they get some questions about what kind of work they want to do, so they can already think about it, or they can do some tests on the computer if they have some devices to know what are their talents. A lot of these people think they don't have any talents, but we have some online tools where you can think about the different talents that you have, and where you can make an estimation of how good you are in something or another thing. A lot of people, for example, when you had an accident and you can't do your job anymore, you have to think about another job, about something totally different. So this is the kind of questions they get to think about to prepare themselves for the second interview.
Thank you very much. Tuija, your changes in Finland, you're particularly now engaging employers more frequently in your programs. Have you any observations about how ready employers are for their new role in working with the employment services? And what have you been doing to get employers engaged in your new approach?
Yes, actually, we made research, but it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, and we know the situation just now. But perhaps I can mention 3 points there. First, first thing was that the problem is not disabilities. What they are interested is skills, actually skills, and then small and medium-sized enterprises told us that yes, there is some importance of subsidized work and those pays. They think that it's important. And the third thing is that they say that actually we want these flexible, tailor-made packages, which somebody they need advice. They need different kind of things, job carving, whatever. And one challenge is that they need more and more information.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Lenka, we have a question about the digital training that you're offering people who are not used to using that kind of system. Do you, when you provide the digital training, is it offered directly by VDAB or is it provided by external providers? Second part of the question is, are the trainings actually online themselves, or are they offered in person, or are they at distance learning? And do you do anything to assess the quality of the digital training? So some questions about your digital support.
Yeah, okay. So the basic digital training, is not given by VDAB. Is given by the trade unions. So we have an agreement with the trade unions that they are in charge of the basic digital trainings of the persons. Whether you are a member of a trade union or not is not important. You go to the office of the trade union that is closest at home, from home. For example, you have we can imagine that somebody is member of some trade union, but the other trade union is closer from his home, then he can get the training there. So it's just some service offered by the trade unions. And of course, during the first lockdown, it was very difficult because if somebody has no clue of digital services, they can't do it online. So the very first steps are always done physically, and now it's possible with the new because the lockdown is not that severe for now. So about the content, they mainly learn to use the VDAB systems. So the program of our career that we are using, they learn to register to VDAB. They learn to work with the assignments that they get, to make their CV on the system, and so on and so on. So it's really with the focus on finding a job, not with the focus of being able to look at YouTube. No, it's related to finding a job and employment.
Okay, thank you very much. To you, we've got a question concerning the overall approach to supporting people with disabilities in Finland. Is there a quota system applied? So are employers required in your country to recruit a certain number of people with disabilities?
Actually, I thought that I answered it. I tried to answer it already. But we also think that we can more or less impact to employers. For example, as I mentioned, these procurements. because there is quite a lot of potential, as I told, 35 billion euros per year, and for example, think if we put this if we ask that this is necessary to take one people from vulnerable groups, if that they can get so it means that, for example, if it's a huge potential, 25,000 perhaps, or something else, and I think also that the responsibility of enterprises, they think also more socially nowadays.
Okay, thank you very much. Lenka, we've got a question for clarification about the rather substantial increase in contacts that have taken place in VDAB. Is that explained by a reduction in the actual duration of the interviews, or is it actually increasing number of clients that you're engaging with in the organisation?
I didn't get the question, I'm sorry.
Right, so we've got a colleague who's asked that you mentioned that there'd been a decrease from 30 to 15 minutes in the contacts. Does that actually explain the actual increase in number of contacts, or is it actually an increased volume of individual clients?
Partly, because of course they don't have to come in, to sit, to take off their jacket. So you just start, yes, with online devices. It's easier. It's also so that we discovered that the clients are more comfortable by phone or even with video chat than in a real conversation. So they speak in a more easy way. It's less difficult to let them speak, to know what is really going on with them. And then also some clients are not capable, or for them it's really difficult to go to the premises. And these clients we can reach now also more easily. But it doesn't explain everything. So there is some part of the things that we don't understand how it comes that it's really increasing that much.
Okay. On the
sorry to interrupt. I'm going to pause the Q&A there for a moment, and we're just going to take a second poll. And then we can return to the unanswered questions. There's still several unanswered questions, I think, for all of our speakers. But in the meantime, attendees, you will see on your screen a second poll, and this time the poll has 2 questions. And if you could take a look at the questions and answer both of them. So the first is, will your PES enhance measures to support vulnerable groups, particularly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? And the second is, will presented today help your PES making changes in service delivery for vulnerable groups? So if you could take a moment to have a look at those questions and answer them, we can then return to the Q&A. Sorry for the interruption.
Not at all.
To make sure that we got the poll in before the close, because we still have quite a few questions to go, and we'd like to hear from Anne and Christine again, I think, before we finish off. So Eamon, would you like to continue with the Q&A now?
Thank you very much, Thekla. To you, we've got a colleague seeking a bit more clarification about how you define sort of vulnerable groups in Finland. Is your focus really primarily directed towards people with a specific recognised disability, or are you looking at a wider definition of disadvantaged people? So
yes, it's I think that we have to take quite wide approach, because it's not only the disease or diagnosis. It's the question. It's a question much more larger. And as I told you, our big problem is that these items are unrecognized, and it's necessary to also have better competencies in PESs, and it's necessary to use other experts, also social and healthcare, and these multi-sectoral teams. And nowadays, if we don't recognize these needs, so we make wrong investments. And it's not wise. It's not effective. It's not wise, and it's something we are concentrating just on that point.
Okay, just briefly following up from that, a colleague has asked, how significant do you think the role of mental health problems is in the kind of issues that you're facing in Finland? Are mental health problems particularly prevalent?
Yes, unfortunately, they are growing all the time, and actually Ministry of Social Affairs and other partners, we have just now finishing our strategy for mental problems, and we are worried because of young people, and actually it's the greatest problem now, mental problems. And for example, I don't know if you know the method calling IPS. I think that our northern colleagues know that, and we are trying to use that model just with people with mental problems.
Okay, thank you. Lenka, following up from the very interesting points you made about the fact that some clients potentially will always require face-to-face support if that's feasible. Do you have any observations about the kind of information that you hold in your VDAB systems that might enable you to more easily identify some of those kind of clients straight away, so you can immediately direct them towards the kind of a channel most suited for their requirements?
Yeah, so that's the basic of the new contact strategy. So I said that the very first contact is digital, and this is the registration of the client. But some clients are don't register at VDAB, so we got them via the municipalities or via some special organizations, and then we know that it will be very difficult to join them by digital devices. Yeah, but for in general, for the 100% of the job seekers at VDAB, the very first contact is done by the service line. So first you register, that's digital, and then within the 6 weeks, that's then 6 weeks for this, you have contact with the service line. You contact them or they contact you, it depends. It isn't important, as soon as there is a contact. But the service line colleagues themselves, they have a system based on AI that is called Next Steps. And this system calculates what is the chance that somebody, based on the data we have at VDAB, that somebody will find a job within 18 months, 1 year, 6 months, or not at all. And the persons get some color. So if you have red color, that means that there is not a lot of chance that you will find very quickly a job. If you are green, then there is a chance that you are able to find a job by your own without the help of VDAB. So the colleagues at the service line first call the red ones. And sometimes it's just the issue is just that the person didn't fill in very well, very properly, the registration form. But in that case, we are trying to help them with them, and then they can continue. But sometimes it's really because there are issues. And then it's the job of the service line. They had special trainings for this, to estimate what is the chance that somebody will find a job very quickly or not. If they think there is a big chance, then they give them 3 months. If they think it will be difficult and directly, they send them to a face-to-face contact. But this face-to-face contact is first human digital. So the first contact is also via video chat or phone and so on and so on. But then they go to the region, like we call it. They don't go anymore. They are not clients anymore of the service line. They have a dedicated mediator to help them. And then for the other ones, after again 3 months, they have their second phone call or their third phone call at that moment. And then we have this estimation also. And after a new 3 months, if you then don't have a job, then in any case, it's face-to-face. So based on AI, we have a method to see whether somebody is very far away from the labor market or not.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got one, I think, very, very good final question I'd like to ask, but have we got time before we go to the polls? Okay. A question from our colleague Marie-Therese Fontbana from La Forêt, the Employment Service in Wallonia in Belgium. I think she's raised a very, very good point here. She comments that we often use rather negative words to describe people who we are seeking to move to the labour market who have some of the greatest problems. We talk about vulnerable people, disadvantaged people, people remote from the labour market, etc. Are there any more positive kind of words we could use without labelling people in a way that probably doesn't help from the first contact in a way? So can we use language that doesn't stigmatise people when we talk about them? Perhaps maybe would our OECD colleagues like to come in on that one there?
If I may, other talented people. That's what we call them.
Oh, excellent.
Other talented people, yes.
Thank you very much. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Anna or Christian, do you have a view on different sorts of language that we could use to describe some of our most important priority customers in employment services?
Well, I think unfortunately the OECD language refers to the same vulnerable groups, people far from the labor market. So yeah.
That's fine.
No good terms so far.
No, thank you. Tuya, perhaps finally from you, do you have a new word for describing the people we've been describing this morning?
Unfortunately not, but I agree that we perhaps we have had some kind of competence and try to find the new word because for example this word people with partial work ability, it's not easy either. It's very complicated, very complicated. We don't like it, not at all, and we are talking different things when we use that word, but we haven't better, unfortunately.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, perhaps Lenka's very helpful phraseology could be introduced into our kind of discussions in future meetings into the literature, which would be a very positive outcome from this morning's discussion. Thank you very much, and back to you, Thekla. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Eamon. Let's have a look at those poll results briefly. The question, will your PES enhance measures to support vulnerable groups, particularly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? Yes, and probably were the primary answers, so that's obviously good news. And the second question, will the experiences presented today help your PES make changes in service delivery for vulnerable groups? Again, yes, or probably. So again, very positive answers. Thank you very much for those. We have 2 minutes left, and I wonder if any of our speakers, Anne, Christine, Tuya, or Lenka, would like to make any closing comments based on what you've heard. Perhaps the colleagues from OECD might have something to respond to the PES presentations. Any final words? Yeah, Anne, go ahead.
Just to highlight some positive notes, there was especially from VDAB's presentation, the positive note that even though the PES were sort of just dunking water in the COVID crisis situation, that they very quickly had to develop new tools, or at least scale up the digital tools. There was actually a lot of surprising positive learning moments for the PES as well as the clients. So just some progress maybe happened sooner and gave more positive feedback than which would have maybe happened otherwise over a longer period of time. So, for example, we also had quite a few structured interviews with several PES managements in spring, and that was also the lesson learned, that the digital tools are much more promising than maybe earlier thought, because many people nowadays have their little computers just on their fingertips. Basically, smartphones are already quite a good device to actually be in contact with the PES, and also the skills of people to use these tools actually developed really fast, both sides, clients and the PES counselors.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to bring this to a close now. We're on the half hour. So thank you very much to our speakers, Tuija Oivo, Lenka Kind, Anne Loringson and Christine Langenbucher. Thanks also to Eamon Davern and to the webinar organizers. This brings this special series of PES webinars on response to the COVID crisis to a close. I believe that the webinar series will start again at some point next year, but as yet no dates or topics announced yet. So thank you all very much for attending the series this year, and have a good festive season. And of course, if you want to check in on the recording of the webinar and look at the presentations, they will be on Circ ABC. The link was put in the chat at the start of the webinar. Perhaps FGB could just add it there again now for anyone who didn't catch it then. So thank you all very much. Thanks for attending, and goodbye.